materials and catalog, the creation of local school library advisory councils, and parental rights regarding public school library catalogs and access by the parent's child to library materials.
Chair recognizes Dr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Senate Bill 13 by Senator Paxton addresses the issue of sexually explicit content in school libraries by providing increased structure and transparency to the processes and standards for school library book acquisition and review policies to ensure that school library collections are appropriate for their campuses based upon developmental suitability for those grade levels and on community values. Senate Bill 13 accomplishes these goals using a multifaceted approach. Senate Bill 13 holds school libraries to the same standards our nation already recognizes for protecting children from inappropriate content. The Supreme Court has upheld the Federal Communications Commission standards for the regulation of content that may air between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., the hours in which children may reasonably be in the audience. If this content cannot be on TV or radio when there is reasonable risk of children being in the audience, then this content should not be in school libraries, somewhere that children are always the audience. Senate Bill 13 also proposes optional local school library advisory councils charged with overseeing school districts' acquisition of new materials and reviewing any challenged materials. If 20% of parents petition to have a council, the school board shall establish a school library advisory council. This council consists of parents, educators, and local community members who make recommendations for the inclusion of library materials in school libraries based on developmental appropriateness and community values. These councils are modeled after the school health advisory councils known as the SHAC. SHACs provide local oversight in selecting a school district's health curriculum to ensure that these materials not only meet state standards but also reflect local values. These principles are at the core of this proposed legislation. Additionally, Senate Bill 13 affirms that a parent has the right to access school records of the materials their child checks out from the school library. While some school districts already provide parents easy mechanisms for checking student library records, which promotes transparency and parental engagement, all school districts should provide such access. All parents should be afforded such transparency as they are the ultimate decider in all aspects of their child's education, including in the school library. And members, I do have a perfecting amendment.
Following amendment, clerk read the amendment.
Oh, sorry.
Amendment by Buckley.
Chair recognizes Mr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment I worked on with members of this body. This amendment would clarify that required curriculum and the supporting books and materials are not included in the definition of library materials. This amendment ensures that parents are notified if a book is challenged so that they have the opportunity to decide whether or not to include those on the list of books their child cannot check out. It also clarifies that a library council can recommend a library material be removed if it is deemed harmful, indecent, or profane, that is consistent with local community values, and whether or not it is age appropriate. And it clarifies that books of the same series would not have to go through the full acquisition review process, and I move adoption.
Mr. Speaker,
Talarico, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield for some
Gentleman yield
questions?
questions?
Yes,
Yields for
absolutely.
questions.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley.
Yeah.
You know, we've had discussions about book banning several times over this session and last legislative session. You know, my frustration has been that the word pornography is thrown around, not by you, but by folks in this conversation. It is already illegal to share pornography or harmful materials with a minor in Texas law. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So my concern is that under your bill, a book could be removed even if there isn't a single mention of sex, even on one page. Is that your understanding?
Well, I believe there's really two parts to that. I mean, we have standards for policy of assembling a collection of library books, and we're going to revert or use the standards that we do per the FCC to make sure that these materials are appropriate and that they're not in conflict with that, so that they're appropriate for children to have access to.
And of course, I think every member on this floor would agree that all materials should be age appropriate. I'm concerned about the definitions in your bill and that they're overly broad and that it may sweep in a lot of classic works of literature that I don't think any of us want removed from libraries. So right now on page 6 of your bill under subsection 4, a book can be removed if it is deemed, quote, profane content inconsistent with local community values. Is that correct? Now that your amendment...
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Profane content inconsistent with local community values. And then in the bill, the definition of profane content means that the book has to have, quote, content that includes grossly offensive language that is considered a public nuisance. Am I understanding the definition of profane content correctly?
That is correct. That's how it's defined in the bill.
Okay, so essentially we are letting, under this bill, under these library councils, we're letting 3 parents decide which viewpoints are allowed for thousands of parents in a school district. Yeah. So my question is, how will they judge what is, quote, grossly offensive or, quote, local community values?
Well, a couple of things. This perfecting amendment also adds that nothing in the subchapter, that's under the definitions, may be construed as limiting the acquisition of materials necessary for the teaching of instruction in or demonstration of knowledge of the essential knowledge and skills adopted under section 28.002. So, those are the standards that we have in our schools that we want our kids to know, and libraries operate in support of instruction. And so that is a safeguard. And I think the other part, when we talk about community standards, is parents are a part of the community. So this is a way for us to engage parents and to have them involved in these adoption and procurement processes.
My concern is that the TEKS, the knowledge, the essential knowledge and skills, don't have a list of books. No. So if these library councils that have to have at least 3 parents on it, if they decide that a book is, quote, grossly offensive or, quote, against local community values, they can then remove that book and make that decision for all the parents in a district, and these parents are not elected.
Well, it ultimately is up to the school boards, because they make the recommendation to locally elected school boards that would then make the ultimate decision on whether or not the items selected for procurement meet those standards or not.
Okay, let me just run through some examples that I think may be helpful. So, Chairman, do you think prostitution is profane and inconsistent with community values?
I think that prostitution could be relayed in the context of whatever the work is before us in terms of a work of literature or content. So
you do think prostitution could be considered profane and against community values? Yeah.
Well, I do believe, I think the most important thing to understand is this bill does not impact anything that would be allowed by our TEKS and standards.
Right. So under the language of your bill, profane and inconsistent with community values, Lonesome Dove, my favorite book, a Texas classic, could be banned because it includes references to prostitution in the Old West. Is that correct?
It is the community values or community standards of an individual community would dictate that.
So Lonesome Dove, perhaps the most beloved novel in Texas history, could be removed from libraries if this bill passes.
Well, if you think about the FCC, did Lonesome Dove, did it air during the time when children could watch it? I don't know. I watched it, Chairman, but it's been a while ago.
Well, it was before my lifetime. But I want to ask about the book Lonesome Dove. Could that be removed under your bill because prostitution is considered profane content inconsistent with community values?
I believe that community values and the work of a library committee, an advisory committee, and at a point approved by a duly elected school board, will make those decisions.
So it is possible.
And again, it's possible, but remember, if these things have value and are necessary for the teaching and instruction of our TEKs, then they're certainly acceptable.
Does Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry appear in the TEKs anywhere?
I'm not aware. I'm not advised on that.
It does not.
Okay.
So, therefore, that classic work of literature could be removed from libraries if we pass this bill. Chairman,
yeah.
do you think the F word is grossly offensive language?
I do.
Do you think saying the F word or other curse words more than 300 times would be considered a public nuisance?
I think it certainly could be considered to be profane content. Yes.
So, under the language of your bill, the Catcher in the Rye, an American classic, could be banned because it includes more than 300 curse words, including the F word.
I believe that particular work is often given in reading assignments in our schools today.
And so it could be removed from school libraries if we pass this bill.
If it is related to the instruction of our essential knowledge and skills, then it could not be.
So Catcher in the Rye doesn't appear in our Texas essential knowledge and skills, and so unless it is appointed as an assigned reading for the school, then the Catcher in the Rye could be removed from school libraries.
I mean, if it violated community standards and was then approved by a local school board, that could happen, yes.
Are you comfortable with that, of the Catcher in the Rye being removed from libraries?
I'm comfortable with local communities and our locally elected school boards making those ultimate decisions.
Chairman Buckley, do you think incest is grossly offensive and against community values?
I believe that it's abhorrent, yes.
So under the language of your bill, the Holy Bible could be banned because it includes a scene describing incest in Genesis 19?
No, when we look at the things that are acceptable to be taught in our classrooms under our knowledge and skills, the Bible would not be excluded.
Are you aware that the Bible has already been banned from certain Texas school libraries, including in Keller ISD and Canyon ISD?
I am not advised of that.
If we pass your bill, could Romeo and Juliet be banned because it mentions premarital sex, which someone might find, quote, against their local community values?
I'm not advised on Romeo and Juliet. It seems to be a classic work that is in thousands of Texas schools and has been for years.
Yes, Chairman, I think you're summarizing the concerns that many of us on this floor have with this bill, that Romeo and Juliet or Lonesome Dove or The Catcher in the Rye, that these classic works of literature that are in thousands of libraries across the state could now be removed from those libraries if we pass this bill because the definitions are so broad. So do you think some may consider premarital sex to be against local community values?
There may be some. There may be some that, whether their own individual value system or their religious beliefs, that could believe that. And at the end of the day, though, remember, this bill only requires that an advisory council make recommendations and a duly elected school board makes the final decision on that.
I think, Chairman, if your answer to could Romeo and Juliet be banned, if your answer is anything other than of course not, then that's a serious problem. If we are opening the door to Texas school districts removing Romeo and Juliet out of school libraries, then we have a major problem, do we not?
Well, I think we're closing the door to some of the filth that we have heard read before our committee over the last two sessions. And I think it is entirely appropriate to select members of the community and then put it in the hands of duly elected school board members with the guidelines of this bill to make those decisions that are consistent with the standards of their community. You know, I mean, to me, this is a guideline set in place for what is, you know, consistent with what the FCC requires for content for children, and our schools should certainly echo that in their decision making, so that we have proper content, you know, that's offered to our kids.
So first point is that the FCC standards require that the work be evaluated as a whole, which we're not including here. Second is if there is filth in our libraries, then it should be removed.
Yeah.
Again, harmful material, as it's defined in our code, those materials should be removed. Even indecent content can be removed. I'm telling you that in your bill, as it's written, we are allowing books to be removed just if they're offensive, just if they're inconsistent with community values, which is pretty broad, I think you would agree. And so we're not removing filth under your bill. We're removing Romeo and Juliet, which I don't consider filth.
Yeah. Well,
we're removing Lonesome Dove, which I don't consider filth. Do you consider those works filth?
Harmful material, indecent content, profane
great.
content.
That's great, but
Then
they
you'll
can
love
just
this bill.
But they can just choose between those three is my point. That's my entire problem. If it was just those first two definitions, I would vote for this bill. I think every member of this body would vote for the bill. But the fact that you are also including offensive content that is inconsistent with community values as another category, that now means that things like Romeo and Juliet and Lonesome Dove and The Catcher in the Rye will be removed from school libraries because the definitions are overly broad.
Well, I would say that community values or the bedrock of what we try to do in public policy, and we try to, we talk a lot about local control in this bill, and when some say we've gone away from that. I would argue that with a framework in place here, you have a bill that provides the ultimate control. You have a library commission, or excuse me, a council that can be formed that not only has parents and community members, but librarians and teachers and business people and everyone else. Really, that's where your community values live. And think about our SHAC committees. Our SHAC committees have been able to take content that is very controversial, and because of that community coming together to express those values, we've been able to come up, for the most part, curriculum that is acceptable to communities.
So let me tell you a concern I have about allowing books to be removed just because they're inconsistent with community values. Are you aware here in Travis County that 70%?
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Please repeat your question. I apologize.
Are you aware that in Travis County, where we're currently standing, 70% of the voters voted against President Donald Trump?
It doesn't surprise me, but
Sure.
So I was not aware of the exact percentage.
Now that we're allowed to remove books that are inconsistent with community values, could a liberal school district here in the Austin area remove Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal from school libraries because it is, quote, inconsistent with community values?
No.
Why is that?
Well, because if you look at, let me see here on page 4 at the top, it talks about prohibits the removal of material based solely on ideas contained in the material or personal background of the author of the material or characters in the material.
But if they find the ideas that are presented in there as offensive, if they find the content that's in that book to be offensive, why could they not remove it?
Well, because the bill is it either indecent or is it profane?
And profane is offensive.
It includes grossly offensive language that's considered a public nuisance.
And you're not concerned that when we allow partisan politics into our decision makings in school boards, as increasingly is the case around the state, that this language that's overly broad could be weaponized to remove certain books because they aren't, quote, consistent with community values?
I think there are multiple tests in this, and one of which are the definitions that are on page 2, and then the decision making of a advisory council.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Okay, I move adoption.
The question is on the adoption of the amendment. Record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Show Mr. Buckley voting aye. Sweeney voting aye. Hinojosa voting aye. Schatzline voting aye. Have all members voted? All members voted. 117 ayes, 24 nays. The amendment is adopted. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Zwiener.
Ms. Zwiener.
Thank you.